Many lifetimes ago, there were only the mountains. The Rockies stood in solemn silence, ancient and unshaken. Before the trees were cleared, before the sound of dynamite echoed far and wide, before the rails of progress arrived. Here, time was once measured by the thawing of snow and ice, later to be counted by the minute. The only lines drawn across this land were the tracks of wildlife and the paths of native tribes who were in sync with Earth's rhythm. In the 1880s, men from all across the globe arrived with picks and hammers in hand. Driven not by the rhythm of seasons, but by a hunger to conquer distance, to bind a young nation from sea to sea. November 7th, 1885, the last spike was driven, uniting Canada under one singular string of rail from coast to coast. But the mountains would not yield easily. Though the final spike was driven at Craigellachie, the struggle did not end with the sound of hammer on steel. Many who are now nameless and forgotten would leave their stories buried in the path of avalanches and the brutal cold silence of one of Mother Nature's harshest environments. These rails remain as a testament that even the highest of mountains can be crossed. Acting as a vital link on the Canadian transcontinental route, it carries more than just cargo. It carries the story of a nation that dreamt of crossing the divide. This is CPKC, the Laggan Subdivision. The ski lifts are dormant, as the spring is slowly thawing out the slopes of Olympic Park in Calgary. The skyline can be seen peeking over the hills that surround Beaumont Park. We are along the first few miles of the tough journey towards British Columbia. To begin our production, a westbound approaches with number 7436 on the lead. It is sporting a shiny coat of the new CPKC corporate image. The Tier 4 locomotive crosses over the twin bridges, which stand above the Bow River. We will catch up with 7436 as we work our way further along the route. But first, we capture a rarity along the Laggan sub. KCSM 4073 and EMD SD70 ACE leads train 609 westbound. The fleet of SD70 Aces rarely are allowed to lead on this route, but today is an exception. The 609 is an as-needed loaded sulfur unit train. The sulfur originates from a facility in Shants, Alberta, and it will be delivered to Port Moody, near Vancouver. The pale yellow makes for an interesting contrast to the usual dark and gloomy loads of coal often seen in these open hoppers. These are actually specialized hoppers dedicated to the transportation of sulfur. We get a better view of them as the train passes us in Cochrane, a suburb past the outskirts of Calgary. CPKC Train 103 can be seen in the distance, winding along the curves within the Bow River Valley. This is a westbound intermodal making a cross-Canada expedition. Beginning along the east coast in Ontario, it will conclude thousands of miles of travel once it reaches Roberts Bank in British Columbia. In 1881, Cochrane was originally founded as a ranch, a common story within the borders of Alberta. It was founded by a Canadian senator, Matthew Henry Cochrane. The railway granted the town site in 1885. It was a relatively small community until a surge of growth would arrive with an economic boom in the 1970s. Now, Cochrane is a vibrant town with a population of over 37,000. In the early years of construction, many of the workers found themselves in an endless sea of flatlands. As the track drew westward, the faint bluish-gray shadows along the horizon would slowly become sharper and more definitive. This would be the first time most would lay their eyes on the Rockies, an awe-striking sight that would stand in defiance to the rails of progress. Slicing right through the Stony Nakota Reservation in Ozeta, Train 301 gives the appearance of an effortless glide across the flat ground as it approaches the mountains. A few locals have given the new CPKC paint scheme a nickname, Option 1. This is in reference towards the original poll of selecting a new corporate look to all employees of the railway. Out of the 5 options, this was option 1 and ultimately the winner. With only a handful of option 1s currently roaming the system, it will only be a matter of a few years before these are a common sight and the classic schemes of CP and KCS will begin to dwindle. The main line crosses over the 74-kilometer Kananaskis River here in Sebe. Leading the charge eastbound, a solo GE locomotive of the Canadian National is seen on Grain Train 302. Named after the son-in-law of Canadian Pacific engineer Sir Sanford Fleming, Exshaw sits on the northern shores of the Bow River. A small yard is located here to service the long-standing cement plant that was built by Fleming, as well as other nearby industries. Local way freights run between here and Calgary on a consistent basis. On the eastern side of the yard, one of many searchlights still guards the tracks. Many of these old signals have been standing since the 1950s. While modern vaders have been gradually replacing these 70-plus-year-old signals, CPKC still has a very long way to go. Still, time will march on and these will eventually be gone. The battleship grade KCSM AC-44s are a very long way from their original home. During both of our visits, we spotted several assisting as distributed power units, including 4514 here. On the opposite end of the hamlet, a slight climb will give you a bird's eye view of the main line. Another unit empty grain train is working its way towards Calgary. Now at the ground level, our chase with the Option 1 new paint will come to an end as the Tier 4 locomotive strolls along the river heading west. Gap Lake. While not officially within the borders of a national park, it would be easy to assume it is, with its breathtaking views. The last of the ice over the water is slowly thawing out, leaving traces of it washing up along the shore. Mount McGillivray, Pigeon Mountain, and several other slopes surround the blue waters. The main line splits the lake from the Bow River, as well as the Trans-Canada Highway. A pair of older AC-44 models lead long-haul manifest train 201, a daily westbound out of Edmonton. The sun has yet to rise above the mountains in Canmore. The popular vacation destination has yet to awake, with only a handful of morning joggers and early birds grabbing breakfast. The initial economic dependency on coal mines would find Canmore caught between a rock and a hard place when those said mines shut down. The 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics would have Canmore hosting several events, reviving the town with a new economy focused on tourism. Here we see coast-to-coast intermodal train 100 as it passes through town. After the railway's construction was complete, the CPR faced challenges maintaining profitability. Despite years of hardship in conquering the mountains to build this route, the natural beauty of the Rockies could only be described as paradise. To adapt, the company turned to tourism as a way to generate revenue and keep the railway relevant. The Canadian Pacific heavily promoted Canada's natural beauty in international advertisements, portraying the country as an untamed, yet accessible marvel. This branding helped attract not just tourists, but also immigrants and investors. CP would capitalize on the industry, building hotels and a large fleet of ocean liners. Over time, tourism revenue helped subsidize parts of the rail network that were otherwise unprofitable, allowing the CPR to stay afloat during economically challenging periods. In essence, tourism not only brought prestige to the railway, but also secured its long-term survival by diversifying its income sources. Several national parks would be formed along the route. In November of 1885, Canada would form its first national park throughout the mountains. They called it Banff. Within town, a rest house for the railway sits across the tracks from the 1910 train station, which still serves as a stop for the Rocky Mountaineer, as well as an occasional visit from the Royal Canadian Pacific. The station was originally built to transport passengers to and from the world-renowned Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel. A potash train is seen approaching Banff. These empties are coming from the Vancouver area, en route to be reloaded in Saskatchewan, home of some of the world's largest potash reserves. Just a few miles from Lake Louise, this is one of the most recognizable angles in North American railroading. Named after an esteemed Canadian Pacific photographer, Morant's curve has played a significant role in marketing content for both the Canadian Pacific and now CPKC. Both rail fans and general tourists from across the world gather along the viewing platform to catch a glimpse of freight trains negotiating the twist of rails that parallel the Bow River. The objective for rail fans here is to capture eastbounds. Luckily to the west, there is a pair of eastbounds that will meet this 113 stack train once the main line splits in Lake Louise. The mid-train DPU, CP8876, is still sporting its commemorative designs for the Vancouver Olympics. While the lettering and Olympic logo are long gone, 8876 is the last out of 10 Olympic units that has yet to receive new paint. The first of our eastbounds will soon enter the frame. A duo of SD70 ACUs is leading Manifest Train 200. The ACUs are rebuilds that utilize CP's stored fleet of SD9043 Max. Progress Rail rebuilt the locomotives at their facility in Mayfield, Kentucky. Both of these locomotives would die on the crew near Canmore, requiring other locomotives to save the train and finish the trek to Calgary. While the viewing platform is easily accessible, there are some that will test their endurance to climb further up to get above the trees that obstruct the shot. Electing not to risk a fall with expensive camera equipment, we would stay put as our second eastbound approached. This is Montreal-bound Stack Train 114 with a duo of retro bells leading the charge. Blending in with surrounding containers, another special interest locomotive would make a cameo as a mid-DPU, this being the Hapag-Lloyd locomotive that was painted in honor of the long-standing relationship between the railway and the global logistic giant. Often referred to as the Jewel of the Rockies, Lake Louise has been considered a top vacation destination for well over a century. The turquoise water of the lake is currently under a thick blanket of ice, but will soon thaw as temperatures finally rise above the freezing point. The acting president of the railway at the time, William Cornelius Van Horn, would lead the charge of constructing the hotel here, as well as several others throughout these mountains. Reinforcing the idea of leaning on tourism to turn profits, Van Horn would state this: "If we cannot export the scenery, we shall import the tourists." And import them they would, as people would come in unprecedented numbers, all utilizing the Canadian Pacific. They would be brought here to the Lake Louise train station. There was once multiple log cabin-style depots spread throughout these mountains, but now this is the only one that remains. A maintenance of way facility sits near the splitting point of the north and south tracks for directional running. We find a snowplow set awaiting its next assignment. Being from the deep south in the United States, this was our first time seeing a set like this outside of museums and still in active service. Acting as motive power, a pair of SD40-2s sit between the plows. 5743 shows its age as the older paint scheme continues to wither away, charming in its own way. 5798 offers quite the contrast with its much newer paint scheme. This design would be the final version of Canadian Pacific's corporate image, featuring the well-known System Red and the beaver logo that was reintroduced in 2017. As mentioned earlier, the main line splits into a north and south track in Lake Louise. The south track is on the lower end of your screen and is the original right-of-way. CP Rail would initiate the construction of the higher north track in the 1980s. AC-44 locomotive number 8557 is seen leading the eastbound 112 on the south track. This Montreal-bound intermodal now works downgrade as it has conquered the crest at Stephen. Eastbounds primarily utilize the south track, while westbounds will take the north. Although there are occasions where a westbound will use the south track if it is light enough. Despite nearly a century's worth of new technology and construction methods at the disposal of CP, it was still a formidable challenge laying the north track. Mother Nature would remind the railway who was still in charge. The summer of 1980 would see what felt like non-stop downpours of rain, halting progress on several occasions. Add to the fact that this was all during a race against winter. Crews would work 21 hours a day for 7 days a week. The north track would eventually be complete and would result in a significant reduced grade of 1% from Lake Louise to the Divide. This was just one of many double-track projects throughout the mountains. Today, these projects allow higher capacities of rail traffic to seamlessly traverse east and west. Now across the border in British Columbia, an eastbound empty grain battles the grades upward to the Divide. While the path was inaccessible due to remnants of snow, the divide is just around the curve as well as the point where the double main line integrates back into one. Westbound stack train 103 is waiting for this 302 to clear. We are approaching the final stretch for the Laggan subdivision. While westbounds have successfully crested here in Stephen, they still must negotiate the upcoming spiral tunnels. Before the spiral tunnels, there was only the Big Hill, one of the most challenging stretches of rail in history. The spiral tunnels were constructed to alleviate the atrocious 4.5% grades of the Big Hill. The project was under the supervision of John Edward Schweitzer, the same man credited with the construction of the Lethbridge Viaduct. A pair of looping tunnels would be carved into the mountains. While the public viewpoints were also blocked off with snow, we'd settle with the 602 in between the portals. This is an eastbound, technically moving west at this very spot. Its train is still coming out of the lower portal, while the head end is closing in on the upper tunnel. Approaching Field, we catch another glimpse of a stack train utilizing the upper spiral tunnels. This is truly a sight that cameras cannot do justice, and you must see it with your own eyes. "103 has just exited the spiral tunnels and now works downgrade as it rides along the side of Mount Stephen, ducking through short tunnels, with rock on one side and a steep drop on the other. The day is almost done for the crew of the 103 as the train approaches Field, the western terminus of the Laggan Subdivision. Here, a fresh crew is waiting to take the reins and continue the train's journey westward. Within the heart of Yoho National Park, Field is a small but charming community. It was named after Cyrus Westfield, a pioneer of the telegraph industry. While now primarily a quick stop for tourists visiting the national parks, Field was once a long stretch of tents for construction workers of the railway. Today, a bunkhouse for crews waiting on a train home is present. Continuing west out of Field is the Mountain Subdivision, which will give trains no relief from the grueling mountains. To wrap up our production, we will set up a few miles west as 103 begins the trek along the Mountain Subdivision to Revelstoke. As the tail end of 103 disappears around the curve at Ottertail, the legacy of the railroad endures, not just in steel and timber, but in the spirit of the connection it forged across a wild and unforgiving landscape. From the visionaries who carved through stone to the trains that still pass through today, the railway remains a living thread in the fabric of history. I hope that you've enjoyed this production of one of CPKC's most stunning subdivisions. If you did, please consider leaving a like down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Until the next time, my friends, I will be seeing you somewhere out there along the rails, and as always, thanks for watching.